Our next speaker for the virtual layout tour is Dave Vollmer. Dave lives in Colorado Springs with his wife, Patricia. They have two sons, both now in college. Dave is a retired Air Force officer, Lieutenant Colonel, as is his wife, and he served 22 and a half years as a weather officer. Dave served in a variety of operational and academic roles, from deploying with the Army Ground Forces to Iraq and commanding a combat weather squadron, and earning his PhD and teaching meteorology as a senior military faculty at the Air Force Academy. Dave is currently a research physical scientist with the Army Corps of Engineers Engineering Research and Development Center. Dave's father got him started in the hobby at the tender age of 8, and he's worked in both HO and N scales. For many years, he is known for modeling in the Pennsylvania Railroad Middle Division in N scale on a series of hollow core doors. But in 2017, he began work on his current layout, the HOn3 Rio Grande Southern. Dave also continues to model in N scale, doing both the Colorado Midland and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Dave's RGS layout has been featured in the White Rivers HOn3 Annual. With that, Dave, I'll turn the floor over to you.
All right, thanks.
You bet.
Hopefully everybody can hear me, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the share. Hopefully you're seeing. Let's see. Hopefully you're seeing PowerPoint. Let me know if you're not.
Not yet. Your audio is good.
Share. Okay, hang on a second. All right, let me do this again. Hit the share button again, and let's see if it works. Okay. How's that?
Yep, it's coming in.
You got it.
You got it.
Great.
Yep.
All right, cool. All right, always fun. You'd think with all my Air Force experience, I'd know PowerPoint better, right? Okay, so let's jump right in. So as the intro stated, I started this layout right in about 2017. I retired from the Air Force in 2018, and I spent a little time out of the workforce, and actually dove kind of headfirst into modeling the RGS before I went back to work as a civilian. So some folks have seen some of my work online. I tend to share it a lot, Facebook pages and on YouTube, as well as we mentioned, the White River Publishing magazines. So just kind of taking a quick look around the layout here. What I'm going to do is kind of go through how the layout was built. So how did I build the thing? What techniques did I use? Then we're going to take a tour, sort of mile by mile, and then we'll kind of take a look at what's ahead down the track for me and the HOn3 First District. So this is what the layout looks like when you come downstairs into my basement. So I have actually a pretty sizable basement, but I chose not to fill the whole thing with layout. We actually entertain down there. The bar is down there. So obviously there's important stuff happening down there that's not model railroading. This little alcove is about 12 by 14 feet, which I thought was a perfectly manageable size to build a decent sized layout, but that wasn't going to be so big I'd never get it done. So this is sort of the cheat sheet, if you will. What are the critical aspects of the layout? So like I said, 12 by 14 feet. Some people are surprised to learn that I didn't use any grades on the layout. I've built layouts with grades before, and frankly, I found they were more trouble than they were worth. Minimum radius is a pretty tight 19 inches, which I can get away with because the largest engine operated on the RGS was a K27. If I were running, say, K36s, K37s, that 19 inches might be a little too tight. My track is all commercial, well, almost all, and I'll get into that here in a minute, but code 70. So the rail is way too high for the RGS, and frankly, I don't care because operational reliability for me sort of trumps everything else. The control, DCC, I'm a Digitrax guy. Most of the guys in my club, and I'll throw a shout out here for Slim Rail here in Colorado Springs, but most of the guys in Slim Rail are NCE guys, but I've been a Digitrax guy since I first got started in DCC. The scenic base for the layout is extruded styrofoam. And for rock work, I'll show you what that looks like when we go into the construction bit, but I use a little of everything that looks like rocks. So commercial foam and rubber castings. I do a lot of hand carving and so on. Trees, I have scratch built quite a few deciduous trees, but I use a lot of JTT and Grand Central Gems commercial trees as well. And of course, this is the RGS First District. So I'm assuming most of the audience is familiar, but if not, it's between Ridgway and Rico in southwestern Colorado. I did not model the part from Rico to Durango. I barely had room to model scenes from the first district. And my era spans roughly 1938 to 1947, which is kind of dictated by the equipment that I have. I've got some bus body geese and the post-rec 455, but I've also got RGS number 25. So I try to keep a pretty wide aperture on the era so I can kind of run what I want. All right, so as mentioned, some of you may have seen the layout before. I've been in the HOn3 annual a few times now. Got another article in the 2024, and we'll get to that. But I've had some fun with it's actually really great working with Chris Lane. He's so easy to work with, and it's so fun to write for this periodical. So between the HOn3 and ON3 annuals, if you haven't had a chance to submit an article, I highly recommend it. It's easy and fun. All right, so here's the track plan. And I know there's some people out there who are real gurus when it comes to the digital track planning software and so on. And yeah, I do a lot of computer stuff for my job. But when it comes to just good old-fashioned track planning, I prefer a pencil. And so this is the layout drawn mostly to scale. And as you see, it's really just sort of an around the walls with a peninsula. So pretty simple. There's nowhere where the track goes over itself and nowhere where there's helixes or anything like that. So pretty straightforward. You can see the main towns I modeled: Ridgway, Placerville, Ophir, Lizard Head, and Rico, with a few scenes in between. And there is a lift out bridge. So I had some design considerations. These were sort of the non-negotiables. I wanted to make sure that the towns were in correct order. So if I ever did operate this like the real RGS, that I wouldn't have to, sort of diverge too far from real operating practice. And plus, I don't know, I swear I don't want to, I don't want to diminish people who actually have diagnosed OCD, but my wife will tell you I've got it. And when it comes to doing things right, that's part of it. I got to have my towns in the correct order. Prototype track arrangements were used wherever possible. I tried to get as close as I could, and if not, if not exact, then it was close enough. I really wanted to go for simplicity. I think a lot of times we have a tendency to try to model what other people have modeled and to model their modeling, and that just kind of spirals into this complexity that can be a little distracting. I wanted to make sure that the train only passed through each scene once. Zero grades, I already mentioned that. And somehow in 162 miles of railroad, through some of the most rugged terrain in the lower 48, the RGS managed to never build a tunnel. So I was not going to have a tunnel in my layout either. Manual turnout control is actually for two reasons. One, I'm lazy, and so I didn't really want to wire up all those turnout machines. But the other is the narrow gauge was still a very hands-on manual process all the way up until the end of life. And so having to reach into the layout and bend the iron, that's sort of an authenticity step that manual turnout control gives you. And really, I'm a rail fan. So as much as I've tried to operate this, and you'll see in photographs, some places you'll see car card boxes that have waybills in them that have been there for 4 or 5 years, haven't moved. So I've been dabbling a little bit with switch lists, but generally speaking, I've built the layout to rail fan. I'm not really an operator. I can operate it when somebody drops by. We can throw together a switch list, move some cars around, but I designed the layout just to watch them go in circles. So getting started, you can see I prepped the room. I just kind of found a couple different blues that I liked from Bear, and I ended up going with one called Utah Sky. I figure one stayed over from Colorado, good enough, right? And these are heavy duty wall brackets, and they're bolted straight into the studs. So I've joked that the layout could probably hold the weight of my vehicle, since these are each rated at something around 500 pounds. And then on top of that, some 1x2 grid, again, most of the weight being borne by the brackets. I didn't have to use really heavy members here. And then on top of that, I took 5mm plywood. It's the micro plywood the plywood underlayment that you would normally put underneath, say, a vinyl floor. And so really, it's not particularly, stiff or strong, but it doesn't need to be because of those brackets. And then on top of that, I stacked, at a minimum, 4 inches of extruded styrofoam. So these are 2 layers, 2-inch thick. And you can see I've carved away little notches for the throttle jacks and so on. And so that is what the actual scenery rests on. The track actually rests directly onto the styrofoam. And then I built the peninsula, and you can see that it's typical, same sort of thing, 1x2. And then I did build 1x3 L girders, and they rest atop these legs that are here on the right-hand side. I paint all of my bench work white. And you might ask why I do that. And I'm going to blow my nose here for a second. I apologize. Sorry. But, on the one hand, I really wanted the layout to look finished. And I feel like raw plywood, raw wood, and so on kind of detracts from that a little bit. And then, my father was always adamant because I grew up in the Northeast where humidity swings are really, really dramatic versus here in Colorado where they're not, that painting the benchwork seals it up. So painting the benchwork helps make it look finished, and painting it white really kind of helps brighten the room. And I ended up painting the underside white here too, because it really helps when I'm underneath the layout running wires. I can definitely see what I'm doing. And then you can see as it rises here, as the layout's coming together, I haven't even finished attaching the peninsula before I started experimenting with the fascia. So much like Malcolm Furlow talks about in his San Juan Central series, I don't work linearly. I kind of work non-linearly. I'm kind of doing a little bit of everything all at once, just to keep the brain wet and to keep me excited about what I'm doing. So just toward the end here, I've got all the bench work in. You can see now I'm starting to lay track, and you can get a sense of what it all looks like. So that peninsula, I'm going to go back for just a second, where you see it sits much lower. Well, this is because this peninsula is going to end up having Windy Point and the big Ophir trestle. And so I wanted the base to be lower. So here it is finished with the lift out bridge. And then as we move along to track work, I did outsource a little bit of track work to Jamestown Trains. And I know what I'm good at, and hand laying track is not one of them. And I needed a couple of custom pieces like this 3-way stub at Rico, and there was a curved turnout at Ophir. And then I just added the ties here, and then this is a slide switch from Radio Shack that just happens to be, it's a double throw, and it just happens that the throw distance is perfect for lining up these points. The track again is code 70 commercial. Most of the turnouts are Pico number 5s, the new Pico Unifrog turnouts. They are awesome, although I will say in some places the gauge is just a hair tight. And I've found kind of the one thing that sometimes struggles a bit is a K27 from Blackstone. The pilot truck wheels are a little bit narrow and sometimes they'll hang up. So fixing the wheel gauge and filing out the number 5s are usually what I need to do to get things working great. There's a Shinohara number 4 here next to an ME number 6. So I did mix it up a little bit. And as you can see, again, working non-linearly on the right, I've already started some basic scenery before I've even ballasted the track. So I did do an article on painting track, and this is one of the things that I'm kind of passionate about, is taking commercial track and making it look a little bit better. I have a real respect for guys that can hand lay their own code 40 or code 25 if you want. I'm definitely not one of those guys. So how do I make my track look like really worn out RGS track? Well, the articles in the 2021 HOn3 annual actually also took the cover photo here. The scene has changed a little bit since I took this photo, but the article will tell you, basically I just go in and I paint each individual tie. You can say, oh man, that sounds so like such a pain. Well, to be perfectly honest, it's really not. It's kind of cathartic. Like if I know I've got 10 or 15 minutes that I can work down on the layout, maybe I'm taking my lunch break for work because I work from home, or wife and I are getting ready to go out. My wife's not done with her hair. I can go down and I can knock out a couple dozen ties with a micro brush and feel like I've accomplished something. So the bridges, I managed to get one of the very last templates from Black Bear before they went out of business, because unfortunately the gentleman that was running the company passed away. Now, since I've been building lots of trestles in N scale lately as well, I learned that building your own jig is actually really easy. But nevertheless, I want to give them credit for a really cool jig. And so this trestle over here, sort of on the top right, was a test trestle. It was kind of my first opportunity to build an RGS trestle. And so I built a short one just as a test, because at that point I had never built a trestle before. And so I liked it enough, I'm like, yeah, I might as well use it. So this ends up becoming bridge 57B at Gallagher, which obviously was a much bigger bridge, but I'm working in 12 by 14, so you got to cut me some slack there. And then of course the masterpiece here being bridge 45A at Ophir. Again, it's not as big as the real thing. I think it's about 5 or 6 bents shorter, but it is about the right depth and height above the river. I also did not include the center bent that sat below the giant stringers that took the middle bents across the creek. If you're an RGS modeler or an RGS fan, you know that the original trestle had a big deck truss here that was later replaced with more trestle bents. So you see, I had plans. This is the plan from Black Bear, but I also had the plans that were in the RGS story books, the ones that were modified from the original B&B plans from the RGS. And then finally, I come to the trestle again later. But then in terms of getting into the scenery, I mentioned earlier that I use a little bit of everything that I can find. So I've got some Mountains and Minutes foam rock here. I've got some cripple brush, rubber rocks. There's another rubber rock. I've got some hard foam castings. And then I've got a lot of hand carving in between. And in the lower right scene, almost all of this rock is hand carved. So being an earth scientist as I am, getting the geology right is important to me. And I think even if people don't know geology that well, if you don't have the strata looking right and they don't blend together well, people will notice. So I tried to make an effort to do that correctly. And then as I came back after I laid in, and actually, let me go back real quick. So I use a scenic goop, and I think it was either Lou Sassy or Paul Dokos talked about this years ago in Model Railroader. But it's a mixture of hydrocal plaster, Sculptamold, and latex paint. And I slop that on, and when it dries, it holds the color. So if it ever gets chipped or anything, it still has an earth color beneath it. But on top of that, then I add real dirt. So in 2018, when I retired from the Air Force, I took my father, who is the one who got me interested not only in model railroading, but in the RGS, out west to RGS country, which wasn't too far. It's not too far a drive from Colorado Springs, but it's not a short drive either. And then we just, in addition to finding all the old relics of the RGS, I just kept collecting dirt. And I brought back pounds and pounds and pounds of dirt from the real place. So for each location modeled, I used dirt from the real location. And I know there's some modelers who say, well, real dirt's too dark. Yeah, it is kind of dark, but there's something cool about, using dirt from the real locations. And especially, I wasn't going to be able to get the Placerville red correctly without it. So on top of the subterranean painted, sculpt the mold, etc., I put the dirt, and then I start adding ground cover. Some of that's from Scenic Express, and it's a combination of ground foam and static grass. And some of it is more static grass and bushes and pull apart stuff from sill floor. And then lately, I've started getting a lot of stuff from the Martin Welberg series of scenery stuff. And that stuff is amazing. And here's an example where I went back and revisited a scene. When I first finished the layout, this whole area was just trees and grass. And this is Bridge 45B coming out of Ophir. And if you're familiar with 45B, in the Ophir High Line, you encounter a lot of rock wall just as you come out of Ophir as you're heading toward Lizard Head. And I felt like the scene just didn't do it justice. And I felt like the layout overall just didn't have enough exposed rocks. It's the Rocky Mountains, right? And when we think about the RGS, typically we're thinking about the first district where there is a lot of vertical rock. So I wanted to go back and I put more castings in, added a bunch more talus and more bushes and so on. And so basically, even at this stage of the game, I'm not afraid to go back and tear up something that's done and redo it. Honestly, it helps keep the layout interesting to me because if I weren't willing to do that, I might have lost interest a while ago. And then lastly, the backdrops. So I started out by getting the discs from Lark Products, getting the CDs. I had a lot of trouble. I had to buy a CD player because at that point in time, I didn't even have a computer left that would actually operate a CD. And then I printed them on 8.5 by 11 sheets of heavy cardstock. And, that got me going for a while. But over time, I felt like the backdrops didn't dominate the scenery the way they should. Again, these are the Rocky Mountains. The RGS is running through the San Juans, many of which are 14,000 feet in height. And so I really wanted to go back and increase the backdrop size. And I finished doing that just in time for last year's narrow gauge convention. So I went back to Bill at Lark Products and had him print me a whole batch of additional backdrops. And I had them print on the self-adhesive, it's almost like a canvas material. And so that way I can shove it behind the already finished scenery. Because I will tell you, that is an exercise in frustration. If you've ever tried to put a backdrop behind finished scenery, it's like trying to put a dog in a bathtub. It's not something I recommend. But, if I had to do it again, obviously I would go with the bigger backdrops. All right, so I'm going to take a sip of water here real quick. And with that, we're going to dive into a stop-by-stop tour. So we're going to go from Ridgway to Rico, which will be southbound by the map, westbound by the railroad timetable, from Ridgway to Rico. So starting at Ridgway, in this scene here, you see extra four, I think that's 452 coming in. You can kind of see off to the right-hand side, I have a Rags to Riches Ridgway Depot. I built the shorter version, and it's still enormous. Uh, you also see the McCarville Models Ridgway office, and that was a collaboration with Banta. And then I have a scratch-built roundhouse here. Now, I've scratch-built the roundhouse before Mike McCarville released his roundhouse kit with Banta, but by the time he released the kit, roundhouse was built, and the track geometry that went with the scratch-built roundhouse was already there, and so I decided just to stick with my own version. Although honestly, I made some compromises with mine. But the other big compromise here is that the Ridgway Depot should be 180 degrees and across the tracks, but it would be floating in an aisle if I had done that. Also, another compromise. I mentioned the towns had to be in the right order, but one compromise I think many RGS modelers deal with is the RGS went north out of town to go south. So in my layout, in order to proceed south or railroad timetable west, the railroad actually has to leave going south relative to the rail yard, relative to the engine shops here. If you're an RGS guy, you know what I mean. If you're not, just bear with me. This mountain in the backdrop here, this is Log Hill Mesa. It actually sits north of Ridgway, but it shows up in a lot of photographs of the RGS, and I needed to make sure it was in my scene. So I placed it to the south of Ridgway. The other sort of prominent feature is the roofless water tank at Ridgway. Sometime right around America's entry into World War II, the roof burned off of it. And I got to think, what kind of bad luck does a railroad have for their water tank to catch fire? But then I have all the rest of the engine terminal bits and pieces that you would have found at Ridgway, with one exception. The roundhouse is only 5 stalls here versus it was 7 stalls in its final configuration. The turntable is from Kitwood Hills Models, and then the sandhouse is from Banta. So I've got a sort of an eclectic collection of junk here, but every time I look at it, I feel like it needs more junk. And then over here is open staging. And I have to say, what's interesting is I first began with Ridgway as an open staging yard without really trying to model Ridgway specifically. But sort of as time went on, I started realizing certain things would fit. And next thing you know, I'm modeling Ridgway. And then here's sort of in the other direction. You can see the roundhouse. You can see the engine house, some of the junk lying around, the elevated coal track, the tree growing out of the sand bin and the sand house, and just some of the other fun things I have lying around here. Again, my Ridgway is probably going to be more crowded, I think, than you would see the real one, because I have a lot more trains than I have layout for, and I kind of get lazy and kind of leave them out. One quick thing, I threw this in here. If you remember, if you've seen books on the RGS, there was something called a deadline of C-16s that had been worn out by the 1920s, and they were stored in a string outside of Durango, near the temporary Durango terminal that Victor Miller built just west of Durango. And while I don't model Durango, I really thought that that was kind of a neat thing. And so I wanted one, and I added one to Ridgway here. This is RGS number 12, and I modeled it as it appeared in photographs in the Farrell book, the Silver San Juan by Mallory Farrell. And this is actually just a Wiseman Models resin and white metal casting kit. And the parts that I didn't apply to the kit got to be scattered with rust all around the yard. But I really wanted it here just to give you a sense that the best years of the RGS are long behind us. And as you leave Ridgway, there were a couple little, I wouldn't even call them towns. They were listed as stations, but there was really nothing there but a grade crossing. This one is Jay's, about 3 miles outside of Ridgway. And again, you can see this is, again, Log Hill Mesa. And then we see a lot of cattle guards and barbed wire fences and sagebrush on the way out of Ridgway. A little different than the high alpine territory that you would expect to see as you're, if you're thinking about the RGS. But there was a lot of this open ranch land running all over the RGS, especially on the south end of the railroad. And I wanted to capture just a little bit of that. But what I didn't model was Dallas Divide. But if you get over Dallas Divide, one of three mountain passes on the railroad, you start coming into Placerville. So old Placerville is up a little bit north of Placerville proper on the railroad. Mine kind of blend together again because of space. But you see, this is Leopard Creek, and this will be Bridge 27A and 27B. And there's the old barn that sat by the Y. That's another McCarville Models kit. Right now, this is the Placerville Conoco station. Sorry, the Texaco station, as released by Grantline. But I'm in the process of building the McCarville Studios Conoco station kit to replace it. And you can start to see some of the town of Placerville there. As we move into Placerville proper, this is the town. One caveat, or I should say one compromise I had to make was the Placerville garage actually ended up being on this side to the right in this photo of the rest of downtown, but I only had room to put it here on the left. So it sits in kind of the wrong place, but these are Monster Model Works models. So this store is still there. In fact, so is the garage. Many of these buildings are still there in Placerville. I had a coffee here at the M&M General Store and talked to the granddaughter there whose grandparents would tell her stories about when the railroad still came through town. But this all takes place behind the Ridgway Depot. Ridgway, Placerville Depot. This is a rags to riches kit for the depot and for the warehouse. So this is a freight warehouse. There were actually several of them at Placerville. I only had room for the one. So the Placerville Depot, again, what a great kit. Those rags to riches kits are really wonderful kits. And I'm really sad that Joe is out of that business now. And then behind it again are the houses. Some of these buildings are also McCarville Studios kits, like these houses and the post office. And you can see just a little bit of the front edge of the river here. This is the San Miguel River, and it ran right up against the track. Right now, if you were to go to Placerville, this whole area is underneath Colorado Highway 145. But the depot still survives. It was chopped up and moved up the hill and is being used as a residence, and it's in pretty rough shape. So if we move a little bit farther through Placerville, this is really all one contiguous scene, but in my mind and when I photograph it, I treat them as different scenes. This is the Primos Chemical Company tipple. There were two just like it. I'm sorry, there were two nearly identical tipples owned by the Primos Chemical Company. This is the one at Sawpit. And then this tank represents the Deep Creek tank. And so this is an overhead tram that comes from Berkshire Valley Models. And as you can see, we're kind of starting to get into some, we're leaving the Red Rock territory, and we're going to start to get into some rockier stuff as we get a little closer to Vance Junction and Windy Point. Well, I didn't have room for Vance Junction, unfortunately, but I did do Windy Point. And if you're an RGS fan and you're familiar with the real Windy Point, it's actually more of a talus slope than it is a rock face. But when I first started this layout, I was a little bit less hardcore about the prototypes and a little bit more interested in doing sort of vignettes. And so I wanted an area where I could photograph narrow gauge trains that might look like the High Line on the Silverton line near Rockville, or Toltec Gorge, or say Barranca Hill on the Chile line, as well as a segment of the RGS. The other piece of this is Windy Point would be the opposite side of the canyon. So a train headed to Ophir would be going from right to left through this scene, but it's going from left to right in my version. And I did a little bit of rock work overhanging the fascia, and that's my tribute to Malcolm Furlow's San Juan Central. That, as a kid, I tore the heck up out of my dad's model railroader magazines, eating that up, fully planning someday to make a model of that. And to that end, actually, I do have a whole roster of San Juan Central equipment. Don't ask me. You just got to know people, but and I do run them on the layout, and this is especially fun place to photograph it.
Yeah.
What's that? All right. So I'll continue. We're going to go into the other alcove. Now, unfortunately, when you're a visitor coming to see the layout, you can see Windy Point, but unless you go through the duck under, you don't get to see the most dramatic scene on the layout, and that's Bridge 45A. So 45A, again, is built from plans of the original. It's pretty close. You know, there's a few fewer bents. I didn't have quite as many girts down in here as the prototype had. I kind of wanted a little bit more of an airy, open kind of look to it. But otherwise, it's fairly true to the prototype here. But you can see as we're coming into Ophir here, this is we got a little bit of a curve coming off the trestle like the real thing. So just one more shot. This is the dirt road that goes from Ophir down to the power plant at Ames. And if you took this road, it would go all the way down to the Ilium Loop, back down near Vance Junction. By the time I'm modeling, this road was very rarely, if ever, used, but I still have it there. And then the river kind of goes around a corner and disappears behind this big sort of rocky outcropping over here behind locomotive number 41. The reality is you would be able to see all the way down the San Miguel Valley here. But again, you know, I'm pressed for space and you got to do what you got to do. So coming into Ophir, coming off the trestle, there's the house at the end of the trestle that, you know, shows up in so many photographs. And of course, the sort of the iconic Alta Tram house and the Ophir Depot. Ophir, I mean, I felt like this is one of the scenes you really had to get right. You know, everybody who knows the RGS and almost anybody who's seen something about the Colorado narrow gauge has seen and knows the Ophir scene, right? So if you're going to do Ophir, you know, you're really tempting fate by compromising. So I felt like, you know, the inside of the alcove is a great place for it because you could kind of stand in the middle and have the trains go around you. Of course, I should have a grade lifting the track as it goes through the scene. I don't have such a grade, but I guess it really doesn't show up too well. So hopefully that's not a big scene killer. But the other thing behind Ophir here is this big backdrop of the Ophir needles. These extend some 26 inches above the railhead. So you really kind of get you get dominated by those mountains there when you're standing in the scene. And then of course you have the house track with a couple of cars on there. You have a lot of junk down here, and this is from photographs. Yeah, there were structures that were built out into sort of the abyss here on cribbing back in the day, in the heyday, that were torn down in later years. And then by the years that I model, there was just a lot of debris down in the valley here. So anytime sort of I have a kit where I've got leftover scrap pieces, whether it's scrap roofing or scrap wood, I just toss them down in there, just like the prototype. And then so looking sort of up at the Ophir Loop town. Of course, the town of Ophir is a couple miles up the valley, but Ophir Loop as a town, this is what you would see. This is the Mrs. Skillen's store with her long wooden staircase coming down to the road. You've got the Oilton Club, which is the only remaining structure from this area still today. And then you have the Ophir Quality Store and the handcar shed, which was here till about 1942. And all of the structures in this scene are from Banta Model Works. I'm sure I'm not alone as a Colorado narrow gauge modeler in saying that if it weren't for Bill Banta, I'd still be trying to scratch build stuff and it still wouldn't look that good. So I have to give props to Bill Banta. All of my Ophir is Banta models. And I found a picture in a book, one of my RGS books that had almost this exact scene after I took this photograph, but it's the goose coming around. Hard to see here, but I have the post office sign. And this is Vera Belisle, who was the station agent during World War II. I believe the RGS had 2 women station agents during the Second World War. But Vera and her family were sort of big in Ophir. They ran the post office. She ran a grocery store inside the depot. And many years later, out on Facebook, I had shared a picture of my model of Ophir, and Vera's granddaughter said, "Hey, my grandmother used to live in that depot." So it's a small world out there. But I modeled the depot as it looked prior to about 1942, 43, when they put the little Pepsi sign there. I didn't want that on there. All right, so coming out of Ophir, we got across Bridge 45B and the Howard Fork of the San Miguel River again. So this is just another scratch-built trestle, but this is kind of unique in RGS territory in that it has a walkway with a handrail. Now, the reality is this would take you over to a passing siding where the RGS would do all of its runaround switching moves for Ophir. But I don't have a lot of room there. So what's waiting on the other end of Bridge 45B is Lizard Head. So I bypass Trout Lake altogether, and I bypass the other oh, what, 5, 6 trestles of the Ophir High Line, and boom, we're right in the snow shed there. And that's just unfortunately, one of the compromises you have to make with such a small space. So coming off of Bridge 45B, you enter the snow shed. Here's what the snow shed looks like. Here's almost the entire length. Now, again, this is a very, very abbreviated version of the snow shed. As you know, the real snow shed was extremely long, and until 1938, covered the entire passing siding. It also covered a full Y. So when I set out to scratch build this snow shed, I was actually really worried that it was going to look ridiculous. It was going to look like a cartoon because it was too small. But instead, I actually really like how it sets the scene. The scene looked naked without it, and I'm glad I built it, even though it is really, really small relative to the prototype. But, kind of like leaving that segment of snow shed at the top of Cumbres Pass, it gives you a sense of what was there. So coming out of Lizard Head Snow Shed, you have the structures that you would have seen there. You have the section house, the bunkhouse, the speeder shed, an outhouse. Of course, you got outhouses everywhere. And you've got just sort of, the other thing I wanted to show here is, if you remember, it was very green down in Ridgway, and yet here at Lizard Head, it's very brown, because it's all the same, say, second week in September timeframe, but the seasons change at different rates at different altitudes. And here we're at 10,250 feet, the highest point on the Rio Grande Southern. So at this stage, we're already into early winter, and the first snow is already melted, but there's still some snow on the peaks. As for the snow shed, this was the subject of my most recent article for HOn3 Annual. Basically, Chris Lane reached out to me and he said, hey, I'm looking for some more build content for the annual. Have you got something for me? And I've gotten into the habit now where I photo document every single project I do, no matter how trivial. And so I use, I've got my iPhone that takes better pictures than my Nikon DSLR. So I just photograph it as I go. And so I'm like, yeah, sure. I just did the snow shed, and I had, a couple dozen photographs of the build progress. And so from there, in about 2 weeks, I turned to burn an article for him. And so basically, I need to shout out to Jeff Reynolds and Roddy Van Giesel, or Gessel. I'm trying to remember. I don't exactly know how to pronounce his name. But these are folks that reached out and helped me with plans and measurements for building my own version of the snow shed. And so, as you say, as you think about this hobby being just this sort of pool of talent and folks willing to help one another, I came up on the Facebook page, the Rio Grande Southern Facebook page, and said, hey, I'm looking for some dimensions beyond just what's in the RGS storybooks. And folks were falling all over themselves to help me out. So that was a great experience to have the experts help me out there. And you can see how the construction kind of went. I drew the track plan. I basically traced the rails with a colored pencil, and then I made sure that all the clearances worked on paper. And then I kept picking up the thing and plopping it on the layout and testing it with a K27 with a snowplow over and over again just to make sure it fit. Leaving the Lizard Head Pass area, we start heading down toward Gallagher. So now we're descending toward Rico. And there were 3 big trestles here. There was Bridge 57A, 57B, and then the so-called Meadow Creek trestle, all sort of represented by this one short trestle that I mentioned earlier. I just didn't have a lot of room, but I like this scene because it's mostly just the wilderness, and it's just a trestle out there in the wilderness, and it kind of screams RGS high country. And so not a lot of vertical rock faces, just sort of open rolling alpine meadows and deep forests. All right, so we come around Gallagher, and now we come to the 14-foot long section of the wall and Rico. So the first thing you're going to pass is the Rico Argentine Pro Patria mill. Now, Banta Model Works makes an exact, or as close to exact as we can get from what we know about the prototype model of this thing, and it's enormous. It's a brilliant kit, and I gotta say, I used his website photographs as sort of a guide, but unfortunately, I just was not going to have the room. I did not leave myself nearly enough room for a mill the size of the Pro Patria mill when I built this area. And so what I ended up doing was basically scratch building, or scratch bashing, I should call it, something that's sort of representative. It's not nearly the same size, but it is roughly the same sort of shape and the roof lines and everything. So I'm trying to just capture the vibe. And building it involved basically building I'm sorry, can I pause real quick? I've got somebody at the door. Is that possible to pause?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll pause the recording for you,
Okay,
Dave.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so I did cheat a little bit, and if you take a look over here on the left, you can see that the core of this mill is actually a plastic grant line East Terrible mill, and this is now released by San Juan Models. I believe they've re-released this kit now. And then so since I started in styrene, I ended up scratch building the whole thing in styrene, even though normally I prefer to scratch build in wood, but when I do my N scale modeling, that's all scratch built in styrene. So I kind of had a big stash of styrene available. And I just wanted to capture these random dormers that just seem to appear everywhere on the prototype. And just like the prototype, we have a loading track that runs through a covered loading shed. And it kind of just sits off in the background, but tends to dominate the view of Rico, just like what you see in real photographs of the RGS. Oh, sorry. And then the next part that we come to is one of my only truly freelanced areas. So I really like building structure kits. It's just sort of one of my passions. And I also really like sort of putting together a town scene. Now, if you've ever been to Rico or you've seen models of Rico or seen photographs of it, you know that downtown Rico sits on a hill well above the railroad because the railroad sits down in the floodplain of the Dolores River. So you really never get to see the town when you're looking at the railroad. So I wanted to kind of move that town scene from the background to the foreground. And I had this chunk of space in the layout that I didn't have any idea what to do with otherwise. So most of these structures, although the structures themselves are not directly prototype from Rico, they are named after real businesses in Rico, like the Enterprise Bar. This was the Rico Cafe and Tavern. The sign I copied basically out of a photograph. There's the Charles Ingalls Mercantile, and so on. And so I kind of wanted to give you the vibe, like this is Glasgow Avenue. The other piece of this is a little nostalgic for me. Believe it or not, I grew up on Long Island, and I grew up in a small town where the railroad cut right through the middle of town, right across the main drag. And I remember as a kid going, whenever I'd hear the crossing bells ring, because they did it 26 times a day, running up to the street to look down the street at the train crossing through town, crossing the main street. So this kind of gives me that vibe going on as well, except in my case, it's a rundown old Colorado mountain town. And so this also gave me the opportunity to model some alleyway scenes with some junk and just the sorts of things that you can even still see today if you go tromping through places like Silverton or Ouray or, even Rico itself. You could still get out there and see some junk and stuff in the back alleys. Leadville's another great example. So I wanted a chance to model that because I really do enjoy detailing. All right, but let's talk about the RGS facilities at Rico. The backdrop again represents a real location. This is Black Hawk Mountain behind Rico. So it's what you would see if you were standing here and looking toward the depot. The depot itself, all my other depots are Craftsman kits. So remember, I've got Ridgway and Placerville being rags to riches. I don't know if I mentioned this, but the Ophir depot is from Banta. This is the AHM plastic kit, except it's been worked over with Grant Line castings, rags to riches shingles, and I built it to represent what it looked like after the 1930 something, 38, I think it was, fire that burned off the tower. There was a tower here on this dormer, and that fire unfortunately also killed the station master's wife. So the railroad did some hasty repairs that are evident on the depot, like these discolored shingles here that weren't painted. And of course, you got another water tank. This is another Durango press tank, and so on. Looking down the track toward the north or railroad east, again, you kind of see that dominating mill. This is the Rico Pro Patria mill again in the background, towering over the depot as it does in real photographs. This is the little fire hose cabinet. This is the public restroom and coal shed. And then over here to the right is one of the there were probably, I think, at various times up to 3 different ore dumps on at Rico where trucks would just dump ore directly into the cars down the ramp. So I wanted to model one, and this is a kit bash of the plastic Grant Line, now San Juan Models Silverton ore chute, but I didn't build the enclosure. I made an open deck. And then over here is the Rico 6-stall engine house. which is funny that they ever imagined that they would have enough traffic that they would need a 6-stall engine house there. But for all of its glory, it was there till the end of the railroad. And what I did instead of scratch building it is I took 2 Walters, and I think I've got a good, oh, I have another better picture of it coming up here, but I took 2 of the Walters 2-stall standard gauge engine houses. I cut the walls down to a more appropriate narrow gauge height, and then I scratch built the middle parts. And then with that, boom, you get a pretty expedient and inexpensive Rico engine house. On the north end of the yard, again, more Banta kits. This is the section house and then the bunkhouse. And then I've got a bunch of those boxcar bodies just sitting off to the side in the weeds that you would have seen on the north end of the Rico yard. Then we have the depot here. I have a lot of maintenance away cars. A couple of these are from Narrow Gauge, Colorado. Great kits. I'm not sure if he's still making them or not. I know his website isn't up anymore, but I don't know if he's still making kits. But you used to see a lot of these B&B, as they're called, or maintenance away trains parked at Rico. So I usually keep mine stored right near the engine house at Rico. And then again, here's a better shot of that engine house here. The doors are from Monster Model Works, but I scratch built the middle, scratch built some support posts and beams through the middle and so on, and then added this little lean-to and a door on the other side. And then the only other thing I would have done differently is move this a little bit farther north. I kind of winged it when I dug out the engine inspection pits for these 3 tracks. And then when I put the engine house in, I realized it's a little too far displaced to the south from the depot. But you know what? If that's my greatest sin, I'm not too worried. And then this right here is the sand house, another McCarville Models kit. So, and this was one where I was kind of whispering in Mike's ear, because Mike's a good friend of mine. Hey, it'd be really great if you did the Rico sand house. And he's like, yeah, it'd be really great if I did the Rico sand house. So he went ahead and did that kit, and I think it came out great because he engineers some really good kits. At the very south end of Rico, I have the Rico stockyards. These are actually, again, plastic, like some of my other kits. And this is the Walters kit. Now, the Walters kit is set up to feed cattle into 40-foot stock cars. So the chutes were spaced for 40-foot stock cars. I did some creative kit bashing to space them for 30-foot stock cars, but otherwise they're built pretty much as is. Now, in reality, these stock pens would have been on the main line just south of Rico, but I've built them on this nice long spur because it's a great place for me to throw my stock cars when I'm not running them. And again, it was a chunk of space I didn't have a lot of other use for. Eventually, I may end up putting the coal pockets for Rico in here. I'm throwing a lot of shout outs to McCarville Studios, but Mike has licensed with Crystal River Products to do their coal chutes and HO. So if and when that product gets announced, I'll be one of the first one in line to purchase it. And I would put my coal pockets up here. So you get even more of a proper Rico vibe. And then the last piece, the last sort of stop on the railroad, is the lift out section. This I followed a technique that Ken Patterson shared in his What's Neat in Model Railroading series. I don't remember which episode, it's been a few years now, but basically I use furniture pins to lock the lift out in place, and they also pass the electricity. And there are cutoff switches on either end, so the approach tracks go dead when you pull the lift out, which was great until I started installing keep alives in my or current keepers in my engines. And of course, now they're not defeated by that kill switch. But so now I just have to be more diligent. But the furniture pins keep the track aligned, or keep the bridge aligned, and they snap them into place so that they're vertically aligned as well. The track is actually that snap track that Blackstone released that uses the Cato unijoiners. And I buried it in cinder. And I did that just to make sure that everything stayed engaged. Now, I will say this, we do have seasonal climate changes here in Colorado where it does get ridiculously dry in the wintertime. And then what happens is the benchwork kind of contracts. That's no problem for the straight section, but the curved section coming off the bridge, if I haven't run a train in a while, I can sometimes anticipate a derailment there until I can sort of maneuver this lift out bridge back into proper alignment. But otherwise, that's really it for the tour of the layout. So I did mention the 43rd National Narrow Gauge Convention, and we did have quite a few visitors. I think we had, oh, my wife estimates maybe 125 or more people come through over 2 days. We definitely had more on the first day than the second day. I think the second day there was just a lot going on. And we had folks from as far away as New Zealand. So I know some folks on this call were there. So if you got to stop by and sign our guest book, I really appreciate that. It was a lot of fun to put the layout through its paces. I think the only thing that we had go wrong was we had somebody try to stand up underneath the lift bridge while there was a train on it. So that was a little bit of a derailment there, but otherwise the layout seemed to perform pretty well, and folks didn't have too many complaints. So real quick roster, you can see I refer to Blackstone as Crackstone because I have quite a bit. I have an addiction. For the RGS, the only thing really I'm missing is RGS number 22. I have the post-rec 455. I used to prefer the pre-rec 55, but I got a really good deal on the post-rec. And the more I run it, the more I just, it's kind of like too ugly not to love kind of thing, where it just looks so quintessentially RGS with a big oversized standard gauge cab and standard gauge tender cistern. And then I have a couple of Concord geese, 3, 5, and 7. And I guess I should have capitalized that other C there. Blackstone also provides me with most of my Rio Grande roster with one exception. I have a bunch of the C19s, as you can see, probably more than I need. I did build a DNR-GW number 375, and I have a video out there on YouTube about that build. And I put a Tsunami 2 in there, current keeper, LED lighting, and all that. So it can kind of hang with my Blackstone engines and perform as well and look almost as good. Like I said, I do have some San Juan Central stuff. I built a Toma Models little 040 Porter, put some elk antlers on it, and it became San Juan Central number 2, the Tuco Ramirez. So if you know, you know. And then I lettered my Blackstone 347 for the San Juan Central. I got one of those Russia Iron diamond stack Blackstone Class 70s that I lettered into Silverton number 100, the Ouray. And then I also had the Blackstone Class 70 DNRG number 401. And I didn't really, so for a while that actually was painted for RGS 42, which I know was a serious crime. But then I got the key RGS 42. So not knowing what to do with that, I then changed out headlights and some other details, and it's now Blackstone, it's now Silverton Northern number 4. So again, what's next? McCarville Studios, Placerville Oil Depot. I'm working on that for the Conoco station. And then if the Rico coal pockets become available, plus, I've got a backlog of vehicle and car kits that I'm still working my way through. So if you want to find me, I've got a YouTube channel here. You'll see it's at Vollmer DP. So D for David, P for Patricia. That's my wife's name. I have a bunch of videos out there. They go all the way back to when I was doing exclusively Pensy and N-Scale. So you can see some of my earlier not so good work. And then Facebook. I know we all love to hate Facebook, but I got to say, there's a lot of great modeling out there. There's a lot of great modeling communities out there. And it's a really easy way for me to update the work that I'm doing versus trying to maintain a static web page. So facebook.com/HOn3RGS. You can come and see my work as I update it in real time. And that's it for my formal presentation.
Thanks, Dave. It's Jerry here. I got seconded into handling the chat for you, and just really enjoyed your presentation, almost as much as I enjoyed visiting the layout during the convention when we were there.
It's great to have you here.
So I got a lot of comments. Most of them really nice.
Should I start with the not nice ones?
Yeah, exactly. Jim Spice says, and I think he must be talking about your idea. He said, I stole Dave's scene for my entrance to my new edition. Thanks, Dave. Bill Hobbs asks, does your window cover lift out?
Oh, yes. Good question. So that slab of masonite that covers that emergency exit window is just held in place with industrial strength Velcro. It'll rip right out and we can egress that window. There are 3 other windows in the basement that we could also use to egress, but that one is still available as an egress window.
Terrific. Craig Wright asked or commented, I really like your non-linear approach to modeling, which is a really good comment, I think. Robin Peel says, I like the simple, lightweight benchwork on the wall brackets. Nice, clean finish for the room. Bill Hobbs comments, I am familiar with direction compromises. The track for my main yard goes in the opposite direction from the prototype. I worried only about getting the scene looking correct.
That's exactly where I ended up.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you got it right. Jake Swaney commented, for 0% grades, you have captured the depth of the scenery. And having visited your layout, I can testify to the fact that you have no idea that it's complete, that the track's all at the same level when you visit it, because the scenery is so well done. You just think that it's all going up and down with it, you know.
Well, I appreciate that.
Keith Pashina, very appealing benchwork and scenery construction. The rock work and terrain features look very realistic. Question from Mark Shea. Dave, would you describe how you photograph the layout and a bit about the equipment that you use?
See this? This is my iPhone 12 mini. That's it. That is actually it.
They take amazing photographs, yeah.
They do, don't they? Yep. Sometimes I'll mess around a little bit with the there's some settings in there with exposure times and so on. And sometimes after the photo's taken, you can kind of tweak the colors a little bit. The one thing about it, sometimes a little too automatic, and sometimes the colors will wash out. If it's like when I'm photographing Placerville, for example, there's a lot of red, and so it washes toward the red and the blues kind of wash out. But otherwise, yeah, that's really virtually all the photographs you'll see. In fact, I've done 2 magazine articles now, one for N-Scale magazine and one for this most recent one for HOn3 annual, using only my iPhone.
Do you use any additional lighting?
Not for layout photography, no.
Okay.
So I guess I should probably explain what the lighting in the room is. I have 4 250 watt equivalent 5000K LED shop lights, and they're set in recessed pockets, but the bulb actually hangs a little bit below the, so they're hi-hat lights. So the bulb actually hangs a little bit below the can.
Right. Okay. Jake Swaney asks, how wide is the typical benchwork module?
How wide are they?
Well, go ahead.
They run anywhere from 16 to 28 inches, depending.
Oh, they
on,
vary quite a bit. Okay.
yeah, so they vary quite a bit. On the back wall, I think they're 16 inches. Rico is 28 inches, and I think there's something close to 16 to 18 inches by Ophir and by Placerville. I think. I don't want to steer you wrong, but I think.
Great. Dave Adams says, wonderful layout and a great presentation. The RGS captured. Alex Brickoff, beautiful layout. Thanks for the tour. And Bill Hobbs, very nice work. I really like your rock work. Thanks, Dave. Again, it's just a fabulous layout.
Oh, thank you.